This is the type of book that brought Leaf by Leaf into being. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching Leaf by Leaf. Today I'm talking about Schattenfroh by Michael Lentz, translated by Max Lawton and published by Deep Vellum. It is amazing to have this book in my hands, and it was amazing to have had this book in my hands about a month ago for about a month of reading. I am thrilled with this book. This is one of those books that, I was thinking about it, and really, this is the type of book that brought Leaf by Leaf into being. This is the type of book that compelled me to start posting videos talking about them. So it feels very, very right to have this in my possession and to be making this video. So huge thanks, of course, to Michael Lentz for all the effort and work it took to bring something like this about. Thanks so much to Max Lawton, who is just the most, just a tireless, intrepid translator who's bringing out so many great works for us. And thanks to Deep Vellum, and I guess in partnership with Johns Hopkins University, because of the sad news with the reduction in the National Endowments for the arts. But Johns Hopkins has stepped up and partnered with Deep Vellum to bring stuff like this out. So thanks to all involved. And I'm going to try to talk a little bit about why I love this book so much and why it's the perfect book for this channel. But first, let's turn to the experts. The New York Times calls this one of the great and greatly demanding literary pleasures of the year. So note, small press, German literature in translation, 1,000 pages, crazy novel, and yet the New York Times is calling it great. The Washington Post says, narrative wonders like Schattenfroh, with its multifaceted, form-shifting assortment of modes and meanings, exercise our linguistic lungs and get our narrative blood pumping in the most invigorating ways. A little bit longer of an excerpt here, the New York Review of Books. It's easy to praise Lentz's ambition while sidelining his artistry. And I like that. It may seem tepid at first, but the more I read that, the more I agree with it, because it's an extremely ambitious novel, which is exactly what I like. Even if the author tends to fall a little bit short of their reach, I want them to stretch beyond what they can grasp. However, there is serious artistry here that I think is commensurate to the ambition. Anyway, Schattenfroh is extremely long and prodigiously learned, with scenes and even sentences that veer from one century to another, and with a taste for literary and art historical in-jokes that might try the patience of even the most erudite reader. I'll just pause really quickly. I get that, and I get why they are compelled to say that and sort of like hedge the experience for certain groups of readers. But all I'll say is that the only way all of the referential and allusiveness would try your patience is if you're the type of reader who feels like they need to get every single little thing on the first read. And I don't think you need that to fully enjoy and certainly fully appreciate Schattenfroh on the first read. If anything, I find it's invigorating when you don't know exactly what a reference is or what something alludes to exactly, although it's fun and self-affirming when you do. I find it stimulating, titillating, let's say. Anyway, All the more impressive, then, is Max Lawton's translation, which renders Lentz's flinty though extravagant German into English sentences that are clear, nimble, and frankly full of beans, capturing the propulsive energy of the original text without sacrificing its difficulty. And I feel like that full of beans, that was playing with something in the review, and it's now been like a month since I've read it, so I can't really remember exactly what they're getting at, though. But anyway, we won't waste time on that. My favorite piece of criticism, my favorite review, however, is the first English review of Schattenfroh, before there was even an English translation, and that is from Andre of the Untranslated. And if you've read the book or at least grappled with it, this is my favorite. I mean, besides the visual guide that he put together that we'll talk about in a little bit, the review from on the Untranslated is just wonderful and does this book justice. But here's a little excerpt. Perhaps the greatest German language novel of the 21st century up to now. This is equal measure Baroque and this in equal measure Baroque and surrealist explosion of a novel belongs to the pantheon of the best works of the world. I'm so sorry. Belongs to the pantheon of the best works of world literature published in the past 2 decades. Andre, forgive me for butchering that excerpt. But anyway, you see what he's getting at. And if you know anything about Andre's pedigree, this statement has a lot of weight behind it, a lot of authority. The only other thing I'll say is that Max Lawton, the translator, has said that this is the greatest work of German literature since Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain. There you go. So now we'll move on to what I have to say about it. Look, this is one of those books that completely fends off and thwarts and staves and just resists, defies the summary statement. Any attempt at a summary statement typically makes the person trying to do it look like a sputtering imbecile, such as myself, when about halfway through, maybe a little beyond halfway through the book, I was out at a coffee shop and I was reading it, and a friend showed up, sat down in front of me and said, "What's this book about?" And in the moment, my initial reaction was, I really think I can explain this, like, pretty concisely, pretty succinctly. 27 minutes later, as I was still sort of meandering and careening and about trying to include everything that I wanted to, and I could tell I was losing my audience, I gave up and I said, look, let me wait until I finish it, as if finishing it would help at all. But, I've listened to a couple of other people on podcasts and so on try to give a summary statement, and there are some really good ones. And I was going to avoid it altogether, but I'm going to go for it. And I've thought a lot about this, trying to keep it to a pretty concise, compact sentence. And this is my attempt at answering the question in one sentence: what is Schattenfroh about? For me, it's about the last gasp of individual autonomy while in the throes of the ultimate form of mind control. There you have it. And in fact, the whole thing is about individuals challenging authority on many different levels. So just a quick enumeration of the levels that I picked out. We've got Jesus challenging the Jewish authorities on a religious level. We've got Hitler challenging the state on a political level. We've got Martin Luther challenging the Catholic Church on an institutional level. We've got Thomas Müntzer challenging the bourgeoisie on a class level. We've got nobody, or Niemand, it's funny, it's like the everyman protagonist of the novel, but yet is negated and called nobody. But we've got nobody challenging the father, his father, on a domestic level, which the domestic drama is sort of a staple of German literature. We've got Michael Lentz, the author himself, challenging the literary establishment on an artistic level. So many different levels of the individual challenging authority. And tying into that, let's go back to Niemand, nobody. This is the driver of the novel. I won't call it the plot, but let's just call it the situation, the setup, okay, which takes hold right off the bat. So you're given this right away. Niemand, nobody, as I'll refer to him henceforth, has been captured. He's been walking around the city and noticing all of these signs and symbols. Lots of occurrences of 666, and ends up getting lured into the bowl or the closed circle of the middle six in this panopticon in the middle of some 666 shaped facility where he is now a captive and has these dark lenses over his eyes, and there's a contraption hooked up to his brain and to his fingers, his hands, such that basically Schattenfroh, the malevolent entity, and his henchmen like Matteo and others, they work for, or rather Schattenfroh is above and the authority over the Fright-Bearing Society, which is a play on the real-life Fruit-Bearing Society. But this whole society has taken nobody captive, and they've figured out a way to cause his thoughts, everything that's going through his mind, to automatically get written out in script, straight from his brain fluid, or brain water, as it's directly translated from the German. But I have to go ahead and commend Max Lawton for brain fluid. While brain water kind of amuses me and makes me smile, when, especially in podcast interviews with the author Michael Lentz, when he calls it the brain water. I really like that, but it's brain fluid has a more invasive feel to it than brain water. When they talk about being written directly from nobody's brain fluid, I think for the English language reader, that for me gets more at the impact and the intrusiveness, let's say, of what's going on here, and just has like a really off-putting, uncomfortable feel, disturbing feel to it than water. This almost feels like a kiddie pool we can dip into. But anyway, so you see what I mean by the ultimate form of mind control. And so these malevolent entities of the Fright-Bearing Society and this panopticon are basically able to control what nobody sees, hence the lenses. And then that gets filtered straight into the script. And the whole ruse here is that the book that we are reading, Schattenfroh, here, this massive art object that appeared in my mailbox. And by the way, Deep Vellum, you owe me a new mailbox because this caused the pole to bend. Just kidding. Haha. This purports to be the very script. And there's just so much that goes on. As soon as I said that, my mind is just reeling and wanting to go in all these different directions. But I'm trying to keep this review somewhat focused. The other thing I think is interesting about this plot/situation, this setup here, is that it really, I think it was the New York Review of Books. They got they just dipped a little bit into our current moment of AI and machine learning and neural nets and so on. But it's a really striking image of that, because if you think about sort of the history of where we are with all of these things, the whole program or the whole ambition of it was to create artificial intelligence. Well, how do you do that? Well, you model it on natural intelligence. How do you do that? Well, you model it on how the brain works. So that's why we got neural networks. And these are the models for what we call machine learning. So you've probably heard at a high level at this point that the way that AIs get to the point where they can do what they do is they're trained on data. So you create a machine learning model and you start feeding it tons of data, and it goes to work and starts to learn from that data. And so it's built the way that our brain works and learns. That's why I say this is the ultimate form of mind control. And yet also, if you think about it, what would be the ultimate machine learning medium? It would be the human brain itself. So this sort of goes beyond where we are today, where we actually set up machine learning and neural networks and so on, and then start feeding data, and says, okay, let's skip all that. Let's feed the data directly into the human brain, the ultimate neural network, and let it do its thing. So it's pretty neat and a little sci-fi in that regard. But rest assured, that's sort of where the sci-fi genre conventions end with this one. It's much more in the vein of postmodernist literary fiction. The other thing I think is so interesting about that is if you start thinking about this just at a conceptual high level of authorities controlling the individual's minds by forcing images to trigger and capture our thoughts. I mean, this stuff is really already happening. Not to go too crazy and conspiracy theorists on you, but there's definitely, I mean, think about when you're on your phone and you just go to a website and there are ads plastered all over the margins of what you're trying to look at, or, that take over the whole screen. We're really kind of regressing back to the early days of the internet, I've noticed, where you're trying to go to a page and you get 1,000 pop-ups and things obscuring and intruding upon what you're trying to see, and you have to dismiss them all. Anyway, sorry. But think about even just scrolling through Instagram. Every now and then, you see 3 posts from your friends and people you're connected to. And then for every 3 or 4 posts like that, you get a full-on ad, right? So in a way, this is already happening. Like, people external to us are already feeding images to us. And you can't look at an image without some thought being formed. And you can't form a thought without that being able to be rendered in some way into some kind of text, right? So you can see where I'm going with this. There are pretty outstanding linkages here. And I just thought that was really neat. There's also, kind of in tandem with everything I've set out so far, we also get lots of different facets for exploration in this novel, such as on page 65, we start getting at Russell's paradox, and it's not called that, but listen. The question was, does the inventory book, in which the tabulations of an inventorying are recorded, itself belong to the inventory, and must it thus be listed down in the inventory book? A book that contains itself? This question, which is only to be resolved in a decisionist and definitional way, caused him sleepless nights. It led him to a general problem of order. Can order only be regulated by an authority outside of itself? And if you're thinking, if that's triggered Borges's Library of Babel, you're tracking right on. The other thing is, Richard Dawkins and the concept of the meme. I had to explain to my daughter that her generation actually did not come up with the meme. They came up with the current instantiation of it or implementation of it. But the actual concept of it came from Richard Dawkins, the evolutionary biologist, and in his book, The Selfish Gene. And he wanted to come up with a way, with a word that described a very simple and powerful word or image or message that could be quickly like hyper disseminated. And he saw it as something akin to a virus that would infect people's minds on a high level. And sure enough, that's exactly what a meme is. A meme gets put out there and goes viral, and suddenly a whole generation of people. Think of this whole 6-7 thing, if you even know what that is. I have a 13, soon to be 14-year-old daughter, so I am well acquainted with 6-7. But 6-7 is exactly the type of thing that Richard Dawkins was getting at. And it's all about something that would be so powerful, it would act as a virus, infecting the masses. The thought comes to me that Lucifer might proofread the manuscript and distort its texture in the process. He is a virus. The thought alone proves it. And it would take me too long to set up all the levels on which this hits really hard in the context of the reading. But the thought comes to him that essentially if what's happening is the book's being written out of this live active stream, then anything that comes along will affect it, right? Anyway, then the other part of it that kind of goes in tandem with the very end of that, where he says he is a virus, the thought alone proves it, is St. Anselm's ontological proof. And this can go, Anselm, of course, was using this ontological proof to prove the existence of God, but this goes beyond. And it says here, even if there is no Lucifer, as some say, he actually does exist, simply because such a thought exists. And so you're probably already getting the gist of the fact that there's a lot underlying this that gets into the theory of authorship and creativity, being a creator, the writer of a work as being godlike. Next part, we get into the Tzimtzum, the Lurianic Kabbalah of withdraw, meaning that God, after he created the world, had to withdraw partially from it to kind of carve out a portion of it that could go on autonomously. 71. So this first hits a little early on, right before we get into the notorious names of the victims at Durin. It says, "My arms are the letters I put to paper. Two capital I's hang down from the shoulders, which in writing make an L." So you have to see like writing coming down. So the arm, see if I'm in the camera there, like this. He's at a table. That's what he means, like capital L. Oh, for Lentz as well. Interesting. The body passes through the capital A of the clasped hands. I put my body to paper. It is the interpretation of a lost script. I disappear in writing. I make Tzimtzum, nullify myself. And then about 100 so pages later, It connects back. For God himself never rehearsed, but only withdrew a little. For there can be no creation without self-withdrawal. So it's very interesting, you know, this is already, I think, now that I've read the whole book, it already starts to foreshadow the sort of loophole. And I'll come back to this, but the whole thing is this mind control. Maybe I didn't say this earlier. I don't think I did, but the point is that what the Fright Bearing Society is attempting to do is use nobody's brain to produce what will be their sort of manifesto. So they're feeding him very specific imagery to trigger specific thoughts and to come up with this. I've kicked around why they chose nobody and, why him specifically for this task. And I don't have anything to share now. But these are already the types of things that start to spin up that necessitate and inform a reread, which will definitely be happening with this book. But anyway, these thoughts are already starting to foreshadow sort of his way out. What's the loophole here? Am I a completely helpless entity? Am I just a catalyst? Am I just a completely helpless conduit? Or is there, if I am actually the one writing this, even if I'm being influenced externally, am I still godlike in that I have some control and some remove or withdraw at my disposal? And this foreshadowing and this thought that's seeded out perfectly, that's the narrative drive for a book like this, at least for me. I am willing to bet that at this point, you at the very least have heard that there is a large presence of art and art history in this book, especially Bosch. And while Bosch is prominent and incredible, both in and outside of this book, I am going to talk a little more about Werner Tübke, because for me, Tübke really steals the show here. But anyway, you've heard about the use of ekphrasis, which is just an ancient Greek term that talks about a detailed description of a work of art, specifically used as some kind of device, like a writing device or a literary device in this case. In this case, we see that since what's happening in this book, the script of Schattenfroh is the product of nobody's thoughts in response to images he's being fed. Really, the entire book is ekphrastic, or an entire book where the one device that's being used, the one literary device, is ekphrasis, is one way you could think about this. It's transmitting those thought images into text. I will also say that the ekphrasis in this book is the best, most original part of it. Sure, there's ekphrasis in other books. The aesthetics of resistance, Vice comes to mind, many others, but I don't know of anything that employs ekphrasis to this level and this pleasurably. I will also say that Andre's visual guide is indispensable, and don't feel bad about using it on a first read. That's exactly what I did. There is no way I would have gotten some of these, like the Vermeer painting of the woman at the window. Incredible. Do you need to know that that's the painting that's happening, occurring, that's the setting? No, you don't need to. And you can pretty much tell when you're inside of or around a painting. But actually seeing it and standing on the shoulders of giants with Andre's work really did amp up the experience for me, and I highly recommend it. And here's the thing, too. Lentz goes beyond mere ekphrasis. Sure, if you're a writer who's great at describing artwork and sculpture and so on, which Lentz clearly is, it can be very interesting to read. But for 1,000 pages, it might get a little old and seem like a glorified exhibition manual or art catalog, right? This is way beyond description. Literally, nobody is traveling in his mind into and through and hopping in and out of paintings and even taking on the different characters and creatures and objects within paintings. And furthermore, when he's in the different paintings, he is in the historical time of those paintings. And a lot of these, it kicks off with him in City Hall in the hometown, in Lentz's hometown of Düren, D-U-R-N, U with the umlaut, that was like wiped off the map during Blitzkrieg era. Sorry. The Allied forces pretty much wiped this, devastated this town towards the end of World War II, of course. And there's this fabric or quilt or some kind of fabric pennant. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it's a fabric thing that shows a timeline of the town across the ages. And this is sort of this jumping off point of the ekphrasis, the immersive or interactive ekphrasis, where nobody is able to go into that carpet or whatever it is. And then he just hops around. And I'm telling you, he like takes a book out of the hands of a saint from this one painting in his father's office, and then like carries it into another painting. And the way that all this is executed is just wild. But let's look at some examples in the text, because the way it's pulled off in writing is a lot of fun. So he says, we're looking at, it's a painting of Saint Louise of Toulouse or something like that. And he takes the book out of his hands, and then he ends up in Bosch's painting of Saint John on Patmos. And all of a sudden he says, thus should I send that which I've written back into my father's painting, from whence I purloined it. And I had to jump back up a few sentences and realize that he's describing that he's actually John. He has like embodied, or what do you call that when you like, he's taken possession of John in that painting. He says, I think very seriously about the fact that this woman with child now guides my quill, mediated by an angel who speaks her language and mine, and I write what she speaks through the angel with the quill. Put it down in my already written book, whose invisible script I make visible in writing. Because remember, there's like so many levels of writing and scripts and books. But then I realized that what's happening is he's imagining that the book he took from the one that he purloined is in this painting. I mean, this stuff is just exciting for me. Let's look at another instance. 535. He says, it's quite wonderful to have a painting into which one can flee. In it, one knows for certain that one can act out life as a transitory condition, to turn away, then to turn back once more, to be man and wife in the phantom of this something, which is an image, and is thus neither dream nor reality. Yeah, I'll just leave that. I'll leave that unexplored. So fantastic, right? So lots of razzle dazzle with the what I'll call ekphrasis plus. All right. Some people are still they're like, look, this is a total MacGuffin. You know, people love to throw these things around like, okay, great. Where's the substance? Where's the meaning? Where's the point? I don't personally need that. But late in the book, we realize, and I'm going to tiptoe around this, but we realize, and it's accompanied by a full-on quote from Cicero, from De Oratore, that I want to be, this is a fun discovery, so I don't want to totally give it away. But what we start to realize is that if you're familiar with the method of loci, the Roman room or the memory palace, these methods of mnemonic devices for memorization, a lot of them, what they do is you take a room or let's say a painting that you know so well that you can in your mind even explore little details of it. You can associate that image memory with things that you want to remember. So like the Roman room theory is, imagine a room in your house. If you want to memorize, like, let's say the days of the week in French, picture a room in your house and associate, well, that's probably not a good one. But anyway, a list of things, whatever, that you want to remember. You associate it with pieces of the room. The room, that's the Roman room theory. But anyway, he takes this idea that was also talked about, these mnemonic devices, from De Oratore of Cicero, and you realize then retrospectively, like, what nobody has been doing. And then you realize it's the one autonomy or the one freedom he's had all along. Also, in my mind, this is starting to answer the question of at least why Michel Lentz chose nobody. But anyway, it's a very exciting thing. And like I said, there's a whole chunk from Cicero in there. And I should make note that the book is full of just straight quotations, excerpts from Hegel, from Cicero, blah, on and on and on. Lots of fun. All right. It's also, I want to say that it's also, the book is engaged in a very rich literary conversation. For example, it is exactly 1,001 pages because Lentz wanted that association with the Arabian Nights. And if you think about it, it makes total sense, because just as Scheherazade is telling stories to keep herself alive, in the same way we have nobody, well, telling stories and thereby staying alive. The book of Revelation is extremely present, and there's so many different things that are linked in here. Gematria, 666, bibliophagia, egographism, that is writing oneself into the writing, ecstatic vision, and so on. And like I've already mentioned, even in the Bosch painting of St. John on Patmos, where he wrote the book of Revelation, and in that image he's writing the book of Revelation, we literally have nobody superimposing on that, or beyond superimposition, really. Dante, the Dantean quest with different guides, different Virgils, is all through here. And then, of course, the Odyssey, the sort of mutual father-son, son-father quest. This is an interesting take on it. And, of course, the name Nobody itself is a very explicit reference, as Odysseus tells the Cyclops that his name's Nobody, so that when the Cyclops tries to tell his brothers who is responsible for putting out his eye. He says nobody, so they laugh at him. This book is also obsessively and emphatically assertive about the power of books and writing. And it's special that it comes from Germany, because I always think about the duo of Gutenberg and Martin Luther. Martin Luther, and they didn't plan this out together, but both Germans, and it was a powerful eruption that has had an enormous impact on Western culture. The fact that these two Germans were responsible for, one, creating a printing press that would finally give us a way to make copies of and disseminate books on a huge scale with a movable type press. And then also Martin Luther, who would take the Bible out of the hands of the learned clergy and make it available to the laity in their own German tongue. And it's also, I think I've got this right, that the High German in which is spoken today and in which Schattenfroh is mostly narrated is the same German of Luther's Bible. I think I've got that right. But in any way, there's a couple of excerpts that I want to read on just giving that sense of its reverence for the power of reading and writing and books and printing. This is a pretty big one, pretty powerful statement. The goal of art is compassion, taking part in and being part of the sufferings of Christ. Art is thus an eternally arcane theology. And that right there could be emblematic or epigrammatic of the whole book. Literature is no dalliance, no pastime. It is time. Life has no more intense experience to offer. Life is truly and only there to be read. One reads life away. Letters are merely another sort of spectacles, which allow us to see things that life conceals through its own things. It's too crowded around us. The empty reading room offers wealth that only the true reader is allowed to immerse himself in. And it's interesting that he says one reads life away. Letters are, meaning letters of the alphabet, are merely another sort of spectacles. And indeed, nobody will not only immerse himself into artworks, but also into actual letters of the alphabet and journey his way through them. So it's a metaphor made manifest in this book. There's also these powerful little aphorisms that come up. Let's see, I'm going to give you, 5 of them. They have exactly the properties of the best aphorisms, just these extremely compressed little intuition pumps, as Daniel Dennett would call them. For example, ambition is the consequence of death. The task of literature is to remember the dead. Mood is always quotation. The whole of literature is a single pseudepigraphy. And that is for sure a self-reflexive aphorism based on the situation in which this book is being written. And this one, I thought this was wonderful. And I love Rilke, so it really hits home. But Rilke needs only a few lines to make one forget all about novels. You need a novel so as to forget yourself. Just to the level of Lentz's thinking and writing. I've given you a lot of the razzle dazzle and a lot of the ambition, but just a wonderful writer, wonderful crafter of sentences. Although, this isn't a prose stylist. Okay. We've got to remember that Lentz has set himself up with the task of making this seem like a script that's being written directly from nobody's brain fluid, right? So it's got, I think that's what the reviewer from the New York Review of Books meant by the original German being flinty. And Max Lawton capturing that well without sacrificing the readability. I don't know. It's pretty, but every now and then you'll get something like this. And I had to look up 2 of these words. But once I looked them up and realized exactly what was being said, I realized how wonderful this sentence is. I am a wandering anamorphote that compresses the script the flashing pencil snake leaves behind in the air. Though it's perhaps not me who flies toward the rose at high speed. It is the wall that rushes past me faster and faster. I hurtle along in dramalogical standstill. All right, so anamorphous. This is a distorted projection that appears normal when viewed from a specific vantage point or with a specific device. And in this case, there is this crazy device that's put over the physical nobody's eyes, but then there's also this sort of metaphysical nobody that exists in his mind that's going into these paintings and so on. Then dramalogical. This is a Greek concept that describes the logic and impact of speed, movement, and acceleration on society, warfare, technology, and perception. So think about this again as he's wandering around in a dreamscape, but it's not a dream. In this really interesting liminal space that he's created in his mind, he is a wandering anamorphote. So this distorted projection, right, that compresses the script the flashing pencil snake leaves behind in the air, because there's something hooked up to his fingers and all this. Though it's perhaps not me who flies toward the rose at high speed, because he's not actually moving, right? It's the wall that rushes past me faster and faster, and he hurtles along in dramatological standstill. And that dramatological standstill, that's what packs in so much of what's going on in the entire book. And I'll leave it at that. All right. So let's talk a little bit about my favorite sequence in the book. My absolute favorite sequence in the book has to do with Nobody and his father visiting the real world museum, the Panorama Museum, that houses the 360-degree painting of the German Peasants' War by Werner Tupke. All right. The Bauernkriegspanorama. Bauernkriegspanorama. The German Peasants' War panorama. I knew nothing of this painting before reading this book, and now I've become absolutely obsessed with it, and will get to that museum to look at it myself. Nonetheless, you can look at a 3D rotation representation of it through the website. Here you go. I'll show it here while we're reading some of this. But this is what's so amazing. He on page 710, he says, then he turns to the admissions controller, so they're getting ready to enter the museum, who introduces himself as Müller, Herbert Müller. Now, because I dutifully and scrupulously went through the bibliography that's put sandwiched right into the middle of the book, Herbert Mueller stuck out to me. And I realized on page 580 that he appears in the bibliography. And it turns out that he was the architect who designed the museum in which this panorama is held. And he wrote a book about it, and that book is cited in there. So we're getting all this metafictional stuff going on, right? And now Mueller, the architect of the museum and the writer about it, not only he himself appears as a character in here that they're interacting with, but portions from his writing on it. Now, he geeks out so much about the architecture of this building that we switch to a 2-column format in our book here, where we've got nobody and his father conversing while right over top of Mueller, and we can read both. And nobody and his father are basically, and this is side by side, they're saying, he's talking about Schattenfroh, father says. And then nobody is like, he's talking about the final state, I say. Individual elements, father says. That's what I've always thought, that you can't get beyond the individual elements. Then nobody. The foundation structure, that really is the key phrase, I say. So they're commenting on what in the world it is that this architect that's at the admissions place is talking about. Meanwhile, you've got Mueller saying, the circular cylinder surface structure, which in its final state is composed of individual elements, also has the task of compensating for possible different settlements in the foundation structure. Now, what's so amusing too is that he's simply talking about the structure of the museum that he designed. Nobody and his father are reading into every single thing and doing their own exegesis on what he's really saying. So they're taking like the final state and all that, and they're thinking in all these different terms. Now, he drones on so much while they're talking that they start to feel like they'll never get past the admissions counter. So all of a sudden, it says, Father murmurs to me that we might simply minimize Mueller's speech in terms of font size. It wouldn't take up so much space anymore. And sure enough, as they're talking about this, in the adjacent column, the font size of everything Mueller is droning on about starts to shrink way down, literally on the page. And while that happens, it says, Mueller shrinks synchronously with the shrinking of the script. So he, as the character, is also shrinking. Which brings me to the thought of making his speech so big that we might slip through his legs and into the building. But we wait until he gets small enough that he can no longer stand in our way. So already this is a bit of fun, but with lots of meaning packed in. So then they're able to slip into or go closer past admissions, at least. Mueller is presumably still journeying on, but in a squeaky little mouse voice because he's tiny. And they've shrunk the text down enough to where they can, I guess, step right over it. But what's so cool from there is that you can start to see how Lentz's artistically charged mind works, because he starts to see similarities in the landscape and the surroundings of the actual walking towards the museum with two different paintings by De Chirico. And I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. And when I was looking at the two paintings in question in the visual guide that Andre put together, and then looking at pictures of where they are in the real life Panorama Museum, I mean, it is astounding the way Lentz made these connections and brought them together and described them. It just, this whole sequence of the Panorama Museum stole the show for me. As they wander around all these different sections of the painting. And this is, of course, I think for me, this book is really focusing on the Peasants' Rebellion, or the German Peasants' War, led by Thomas Müntzer against the authorities of the time. And of course, they were smashed down in the end. The peasants were. This, for Lentz and for Schattenfroh, the book, this is the ultimate flashpoint, the sort of the piece of German history that's really being analyzed and highlighted here. But at one point, I'm skipping tons of stuff for you to discover and enjoy on your own. But at one point, he gets to this portion of the painting that's highlighting the invention of the printing press, and people are at work printing a book in the painting. But from within, it's amazing. Nobody discovers that they're actually printing copies of Schattenfroh. Now, yeah, so it goes from there. Now, Lentz decides to ratchet it up even another level, and I'll leave it at this for this part of it. But let's just say that nobody is then made a part of or integrated into the printing press within the painting, and is used as a piece of the press to print out copies of Schattenfroh. There's just the frames going on here are outrageous, and really this book can be seriously studied. Like I think Andre might have said it in his review, or I read it in some review, but they were talking about how surely years from now there are going to be PhD dissertations on this book. I mean, it's that level. But in any case, wrapping up this review, I can't recommend it enough. It's some of the best reading that I've enjoyed. I can't wait to reread it. I feel like there's one more thing I was going to say about it. Oh yeah, the ending. How could I forget? So if you want to, you can go ahead and stop this video, but I'm just going to give my 2 cents about what I think is going on here. Towards the very, very end, we realize that Schattenfroh, the entity, and the German language, and so on, have basically infected the text, infected the language. And towards the very end, they figure out a way, or I say nobody figures out a way to collude with people to de-print the book. So literally like whitewashing the book. And we see the actual graphical effects of this on the very last page. And we see that Schattenfroh is becoming pretty much incoherent. And then we're left with a sentence that looks like it loops back to the beginning. But I don't see this as a loop back to the beginning. I mean, I see this as a starting over. It does echo the beginning, but this is my 2 cents about what I think has happened. I think that it's a very hopeful book because, to me, nobody used the mnemonic methodology from Cicero to sort of associate his own history and associate his own thoughts and the things he wanted to say and narrate all over these paintings. And it was executed in such a way to where he figured out how to manipulate it and deprint the text and basically overthrow Schattenfroh, and then start over and write his own book. So to me, one calls this writing at the end represents the starting over with full autonomy. I could be dead wrong, and when I reread it, I may regret saying all this. But I look forward to rereading it because I'll be honest, it's been about a month, maybe a little more, since I finished it, and I'm only just now able to talk about it. There's so much meat to it that I've had to digest for over a month, and my mind is still churning on it. But it's given rise to so many different thoughts and suppositions and intrigues that I'm fully primed for another reading. So again, I can't recommend this enough. I pre-ordered this copy. It was not given to me by Deep Vellum. I make zero money off of selling this book or anything like that. I'm just telling you genuinely, as a solitary independent reader, if you like the recommendations that I give on this channel, and you come to me because you have similar taste, then I'm telling you, you want this one. I will also say that you should read it exclusively and just totally immerse yourself in it. I don't think it would work well to just pick through, but I could be dead wrong. With this one, I set up my schedule such that I could sort of take it in big gulps. It's a big gulp, not a sipper. But in any case, that's all I've got to say about it. And let me know what you think.